Now, on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app. O'Connor and Company.
7:37 O'Connor and Company on a busy Monday morning, 23rd day of June. Coming up at 8:05, Caroline Glick. She's an advisor to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. 8:35, RNC Chairman Michael Watley. It's Larry O'Connor with Julie Dunlop. Julie, good morning.
Good morning.
Joining us now is Jonathan Shanzer, Executive Director of Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Jonathan, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Pleasure to be with you.
Is the Middle East a safer place now after the bombing strike against the Iranian nuclear facilities?
Big picture, absolutely it is. You don't have the threat of a nuclear Iran. And I think on top of that, the Israelis have done a lot to reduce those ballistic missile stores that the regime had. But the work's not over. And I think we need to just be aware the Israelis are still at it day in and day out. I mean, 24/7, they've got those F-35s up in the skies over Iran. They're still chipping away at the power of the regime. And I think we also need to understand that the regime right now, it's like a wounded animal. And they may decide to lash out at the United States. We could see attacks on American troops. We could see attacks against consulates and embassies, or even lone wolf attacks against Americans overseas. These things are possible, but I would just say that it would be suicide for the regime to go down this road. It doesn't mean they won't do it, but like I said, because they really do seem like wounded animals right now. But I would say that broadly speaking, the picture looks pretty good, that the nuclear program has been dismantled. The military is being dismantled. That is a good thing when we're talking about the world's foremost state sponsor of terrorism and a regime that was responsible for killing and maiming hundreds of American servicemen in Iraq and Afghanistan over the years. So I think overall, I'm pretty happy with what I see so far.
Jonathan, I'm just curious if you have a sense of when we will know with certainty that these facilities were destroyed or crippled to a point of, not really being able to come back online for years and years. I know that, we obviously can't go tour them, but what is the process of sort of determining the level of destruction that occurred and to just assurance that it is really over?
Yeah, I mean, look, we had that press conference yesterday morning with Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and some of his generals, and they were starting to give, what we call the BDA, the battle damage assessment. I think it's still a process. I think it's not an event, as they say. And so they're still collecting intelligence. They're picking up signals intelligence from the regime. They're trying to, I think, get a sense on the ground of what's happening. But this is not easy stuff, right? It's an active war zone, and it's chaos. I did see this morning that the Israelis were bombing the roads to Fordo. So in other words, they're not letting regime assets get close to this nuclear facility that was hit. And my assumption is that there are probably Israeli special forces on the ground. Maybe there are American assets there as well, just trying to get a sense of, if things need to be hit again, where the proper place would be for an F-35, for example, one of the Israeli planes. I don't think the U.S. wants to go back. I think that if there's any cleanup here, it is almost certainly going to come from the Israelis.
Jonathan Shanzer is our guest. He's the Executive Director of Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Jonathan, the President, in his remarks to the nation Saturday night, had a renewed call for peace. He said, now's the time. Let's get peace in the region. Iran needs to come to the table. What does peace with Iran look like at this point? Is it possible with the current regime?
Well, I think you're putting your finger on it right there. I mean, this is a regime that regularly calls for death to America, death to Israel. They hate the West. Their entire reason for being is spreading what they call, the Islamic Revolution. They want to see more people rise up in violence and Islamist hate. And so the idea that they would, capitulate to the United States, that they would surrender to Israel, this just seems highly unlikely. I mean, I think you have to ask, are they still the Islamic Republic of Iran if they do these things? And I think the answer is no. But look, I do think that there are ways of bringing down this regime, even from within. I am sure that right now there are disaffected mid-level ranks within the regime that are saying, I don't want to die for this crazy old kook. That Ali Khamenei, right, he's brought us to the edge of disaster, and I've got to imagine that there are people right now thinking, hey, maybe I can bring him down and bring Iran to the table. We can save our own bacon, so to speak, and maybe move on from here. So I think there's that, and I think you also need to remember that just even over the last 12 hours or so, the Israelis have been hitting some signs of power for the regime internally. They're sort of apparatus for repression. They've hit the Basij. They've hit the IRGC. They've taken out at least the entrance to Evin Prison, which is where political dissidents are held. In other words, it looks like what the Israelis are now trying to do is to message to the people of Iran that they should rise up. And that's not going to be something you see the United States do. But I do think that the Israelis have no fear whatsoever about pushing for something like that.
We'll leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us, though. Always good to talk with you. That's Jonathan Shanzer, Foundation for Defense of Democracies. It's 7:43.